So for this finals, we have Team Liquid against Cloud9, the victors of the past three splits versus a team that really hasn't gotten a victory in about 5 years. So there's kind of a lot of history on the line when it comes to this because TL can get a four-peat, which has never been done before, and Cloud9 can finally get a victory on their belt after so long. And so I wanted to go over this matchup and also first the recent games, because this is what's going to draw a lot of people's attention to when judging these teams, because on the outset, one team looks quite bad or quite out of form and another team actually looks pretty dominant. So with the recent games in mind, we can kind of look towards Team Liquid first off, because they didn't fare well against Clutch. Now, when you look at the team itself, Impact, first of all, didn't look great on Jace. He looked actually horrid on Jace. And so this was one of the games in which, in the past, you would just be like, all right, yeah, Impact on carries, like what the fuck is that going to do? But in recent times, actually, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense because he has been put on more carries and given a little bit more agency within the team. So it was just kind of a strange game from him. But not only that, he just didn't look that great in the entire series anyways, because oftentimes when he gets ganked, he doesn't die to the gank, and then they end up turning shit around elsewhere on the map, and maybe Smithy ganks bot lane or ganks mid or what have you, or steals some camps or some shit. But like this game, it really didn't happen a whole lot. So it was like maybe Clutch or Lyra took a path in which Smithy didn't expect, and then that, of course, led to Impact's death. And I think that's actually one of the major cases that you can make for that gank on against Jace, right? So now, with that said, with the top lane, Core JJ was also a non-factor in the entire series. It just felt like he didn't pull off anything spectacular, which is his kind of regular in that sense, is that he is, voted the second most valuable player in the entire league, below Svenskeren, just barely. And so with that, it's like, well, you expect this guy to do some miraculous shit pretty much every game, but he really didn't pull that off this entire series. So it just felt like he was really lackluster and just kind of an average player, which, as we all know, Core JJ is not. So just this entire series felt really off from him, and that really didn't help with Kane. He was also off too this entire series, and the fact that he just botched draft. Like, while I get the thought process or the logic that you can let something through in which you aren't quite sure about in the first sense, and that Quiyana, right, she seems fine to not ban, right? Because maybe you just don't know how good Demonte is with that champion, right? And you're like, oh, we haven't really faced it that much. Maybe he's not that fucking good. And especially with Jensen in the mid lane, you're just like, I completely outclass this motherfucker. So let him get Quiyana. It's not going to matter. Like, no matter what champion he gets, he can never be better than me, right? Maybe that was the outset, right? And I understand that. So let it through one game. That's fine. Rumble is not fine. So recently we heard in Team Liquid's squad video that Doublelift was just saying, I really don't care about Rumble. Like, go ahead, let Rumble through. It's fine. And it's like, no, that's not fine. That is not fine at all. That's clearly Hooney's best champion, but not only that, it's Clutch Gaming's best champion. As the entire squad, the entire team, they play so well around his pressure and how he can actually kind of initiate team fights, and then follow-up initiation happens right after, maybe with a Braum or something, right? So Clutch Gaming just looked really good with this pick, and I think it's completely unacceptable that they let that through in a draft. It just doesn't make any sense to me, because that's literally Clutch Gaming's bread and butter. So I don't think that was a smart move from Kane. And then the only kind of, I guess, redeeming quality about this entire series for Team Liquid was Jensen, because he looked really good on Akali. Now, like, we can kind of side glance that Corki play in the bot lane, but aside from that, it just seemed like Jensen was really on point for the majority of the series. And sure, like, sometimes he couldn't entirely carry the series or some games when he got fed, but I feel realistically he actually performed to the best of his capabilities, aside from that Corki game. So overall, I just think Team Liquid at least looked out of balance, and some players just weren't performing up to the level in which we expect them to normally perform. So it just looked completely like a far different Team Liquid. So if we're judging off of just the recent games or the recent series itself, then yeah, Team Liquid does look kind of bad, and it looks like they're going to lose against Cloud9. Now, Cloud9 looked quite good against CLG. And now, factoring both of these two teams in, you figure, well, okay, it seems like C9 is going to win, but that's without the entire context of anything that happened beforehand. It's like making all things irrelevant beforehand, which I don't think any analyst worth their salt would actually spit out, right? It just doesn't seem like a likelihood situation, right? Like, all that culmination doesn't actually equal to, okay, well, this team did bad against this one team recently. That means they're going to do bad, all the other times. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, and I don't think holds a lot of weight. So Cloud9 doing good against CLG. I thought the first game was just good pressure all around the map. Like, they were just splitting up the map, 1-3-1. Let's just fucking close this out. CLG, now sure, you could fault them for really not making any plays, right? I think the game ended with like under 10 kills or some shit between both of the teams. So it was like, all right, like, we take your inhibitors, like, we take your other inhibitor, and then you start trying to fight us at the Nexus. Yeah, there's a big problem in that. So that's not to take away Cloud9's good play, because, well, if you have good pressure points all around the map, whatever move that CLG does is a wrong move. You put them in that situation to where, well, whatever move that you make, I'm going to make you lose more than you gained at whatever point of the map that you tried to attack. So it's a really good game by Cloud9, I think, overall. Now, sure, let's talk about that game 3 and how they entirely threw at the Nexus. Like, that was incredibly bad. It was just bad micro in the sense that, of course, Zazel black shielded the wrong target. It was Licorice instead of Sneaky, and they jumped on Sneaky, killed him instantly, and then just turned on the rest of the team. But even still, just disregarding that, I felt like they were super rushed to try and end that game, and that's why they made that mistake going at that time, right? They could have just waited till they had a lot more minion pressure and then tried to go off of that, because, I mean, if you try and rush things too quickly, then it just becomes a 5v5, right? And if you do make a micro mistake, it's going to be even more glaring. So I just think they kind of rushed that game quite a bit, which maybe then shows their type of mentality when it comes to winning in, a best of 5, is that, well, maybe they might rush some steps instead. And that's not to say that Team Liquid doesn't rush steps either. We saw in a couple of their games, actually, that they tried to rush for objectives, I think they did a dragon at one point in which it was completely unfavorable fight, but they decided to fight anyways, and they didn't really have a whole lot of vision or pre-set up or pre-established team fight lines in order to actually take the fight. So yeah, they had both kind of rushed different situations, and I think that's a bad look for both of these teams. Now, looking at these teams throughout the split, as I said before, because you can't just judge off of one best of 5 recently, it's a decent indicator, but I don't think it's the full story. But it's that TL has been improving at a pretty steady pace, I would say. I mean, they've been giving Impact more agency, which I think is a really, really big thing. This was after MSI, they started to actually give Impact more carries, right? He's been in a more carry-oriented role, which we've never actually seen from Impact since like fucking SKT days, right? When he played Jax. So he's been playing like Jace and GP and Renekton and Aatrox and looked quite good on all of them. And it's kind of shocking in a way in how it's taken Team Liquid so long in order to give Impact this agency to carry games. In one way of that, well, he historically has been known to be pretty good on carries back in the day, but then it turned to a full-fledged tank meta in the top lane for the most part throughout multiple different seasons, right? And so, yeah, of course people are going to think he's just a tank player himself, but if you just go back to his roots, like most players have actually started as carry players. That's why they got picked up in the first place, actually. So giving him more agency, I think, is a good thing, and it's shown that Team Liquid and maybe Doublelift or Jensen are allowing resources to be pushed more towards topside. And that's not the sense of that Xmithy is actually going to gank topside because he really doesn't, but it's the fact that he has been showing that he can at least put ward coverage or maybe create distinct lines in which they know exactly what the ward pattern is for, or the jungle pathing that is the enemy jungler. So I just think they've kind of been more attuned to Impact, and I think that's a really good thing, and that's a really good sign for Team Liquid going into Worlds. Now, for the other part, I think Team Liquid actually play around his mid pressure come mid game a lot better. So that is to say, if he gets his own advantage in the top lane, then they decide, okay, let's play around Impact's pressure and let's do things around the map in which maximize his pressure in the 1v1. And I think that's a really good thing that they haven't really tried to do before, to be honest. So that's a change of pace, and I think that's a different way in which Team Liquid actually play. They don't play necessarily towards Impact. He's still on an island and everything, but if he does get an individual lead, they actually play towards that, which is a good thing. So I think that's changed a lot in terms of how Team Liquid's playstyle has shaped up. Now, on the other factor, I think Jensen himself has had a couple pop-off games throughout the split, and that's been really meaningful because, I mean, he's mostly stayed at the wayside when it comes to, not demanding a whole ton of resources in the mid lane. So he's kind of in the same boat of Impact, and to where if he does get an individual lead, then they will play towards him, but for the most part they'll play towards bot lane. And they've practiced a couple times playing towards mid lane, but I don't think it's been at a dramatic level necessarily. So it's been a different way in which TL want to play, and especially showing their signs within playoffs to where they gave him Macaulay multiple times and played off of his pressure during that. Not incredibly well, but they still tried to play through that pressure. I think that shows signs of life into where Team Liquid are willing to actually play a different playstyle other than counter gank bot, if they try and gank bot, or play towards bot no matter what. So I think this is just a completely different look from Team Liquid, and I'm pretty impressed with their progress and improvement thus far. So as far as the matchups themselves within this particular series, with all that context, I think Cloud9's mid-jungle duo is just better. I really think it is. They look really good. Obviously, with the MVP in the fucking jungle, they look incredibly good. And this is the biggest mismatch for Cloud9 in terms of how they actually win the game. I think they win through the mid-jungle duo with Svenskeren and Nizki. Now, that's not to say that Jensen or Xmithy are slouches, and I think actually this might be one of the best matchups for them in that regard is the fact that, well, okay, Xmithy, he's a jungler that has incredible intuition. I would say that is his best skill by far. Now, a lot of people cite that Xmithy's team fighting is actually his best skill. I would argue against that, actually. I would think that Xmithy is a jungler which knows exactly what the enemy jungler is pretty much going to do, because oftentimes you'll find that Xmithy's main point of power is his ability to counter gank. He knows exactly where the enemy jungler is going to be, and then therefore he either makes a counterplay on the other side of the map, or he ends up actually matching that gank and turning the tides. So this guy is just kind of cerebral in that sense. He's not the most crazy mechanical jungler. He's not the most aggressive jungler. He's not even the most he's not even the greatest jungler when it comes to pathing in the ultimate sense. I would say you have to have a pretty high degree of pathing when it comes to counter ganking, or maybe going for a counter jungle, or maybe matching a gank on the other side of the map. But for the most part, I think Xmithy's main point of power is intuition, and I think that'll come into factor when thinking about this entire matchup of mid jungle duo. And so for top lane, I give it to Impact. I think I've never seen Impact really feed too hard. There's only been like a handful of games and to where he has actually like fed, but when looking at Impact versus Licorice, it's like fucking sensei versus student, quite literally, but also figuratively as well too, in that they have the same style, but it's the idea that Impact is better at just that style because he literally is like the originator of that style and taught Licorice. So I don't expect it to go in Licorice's favor either way. Now, granted, it might be decently close, but if there is going to be an advantage within that lane, which I really don't think there actually is going to be an advantage unless Svenskeren wants to try and gank top and make the mistake of trying to gank Impact, which he has shown pretty much time and time again, besides that Clutch Gaming series, that he is impervious to ganks. So with that said, if they just leave those two on an island, I think it'll just kind of even out. Now, with the champion pools, I've never seen Impact actually play Kled. I mean, I think he's got like 3 games on it or some shit in C9. But, we obviously know that Licorice plays Kled, so that could be a pocket pick. Now, for Licorice, I know he doesn't really play Renekton, at least in the LCS. I know he's played it in Challenger before, but that was way back. So we have 2 different unique picks in which maybe might become a factor within this series, because we know they both can play Aatrox. They both can play GP. So it's going to either be a contest to either leave those 2 picks open to where, both of them get their picks from those different sides, or we find that both of those are banned and then they just pick fucking Kled or they pick Renekton. So it's going to be a really interesting match, and I think actually this puts more power into the hands of the coaches rather than the players themselves, because now you have this weird situation in which you have to choose between this top lane meta, and with the pocket picks in those factors, it's going to be incredibly difficult for them. So I don't envy that shit. I don't know how you really deal with that, other than maybe you ban the Gangplank because they're both so fucking good at it, and you let Impact get Aatrox, and then you pick Kled into it as the counter to counter his healing or some shit. But realistically, it's more complicated than that. And then, of course, every top laner has practiced Jace, but Impact is probably better at Jace. So, there is always that reserve, aside from the fucking Clutch Gaming series. I think Impact's actually pretty good on Jace. So, for mid-jungle, I already said, like, C9's just slightly better, I think. And so that plays into their factor. Bot and support goes heavily towards Team Liquid. I mean, you have Doublelift and Core JJ versus Sneaky and Zazel, who hasn't looked the greatest this entire split. So you have a passive bot lane against a really aggressive bot lane. And I think there's an only matter of time until Doublelift and Core JJ pop off in one of the games within the series to ultimately give them a free game. So with that said, I'm predicting a 3-2 to TL. And if we see the Sonateric bot lane from Team Liquid, I actually don't think that Sneaky and Zazel are aggressive enough to even take advantage of the weak early levels of Sonatark or Sona Tahm Kench. I just don't think they have the gall or the aggressiveness in order to actually punish that. Now, sure, you could say Sneaky picks, say, Draven, for instance, but then you just fucking ban the Draven later, right? Or you even just go into his Draven, and I don't think his Draven is actually that clean. So I just think, realistically, I don't see a way for Cloud9 to punish the bot lane. So that's almost a free win in that Cloud9 might even have to ban Sona just for that. And then, well, you might give up, as I said before, for the top lane matchup, you might give Aatrox or GP, and then you're fucked either way because Impact is pretty fucking good on both of those champions. So I'm predicting a 3-2 for TL. I think Reaper is definitely going to botch at least one of these drafts trying something cheeky. And the reason why I say this is because best of 5, Reaper really hasn't done so hot against the best teams. Now, sure, he's beaten teams in quarterfinals or semifinals, but when it comes to like the big boss, the big pressure game, he seems to fold, at least in one of those drafts, and then the players have to try and manage to pick up the pieces and kind of work with whatever shit draft that he produced. And I'm not saying that Reaper is a bad coach at all. Like, he's pretty good in his own right, but in best of 5 situations, I just think he goes more on feeling than he should, or maybe he goes on player opinion more than he should. I don't know what case that is, but I just feel like he does things more spontaneously than a coach should do, and he doesn't really follow the meta as accurately as maybe a Coach Kane would. So I'm predicting 3-2 TL, and as long as Jensen doesn't play into Quiyana or something because Niski has that pocket pick, and maybe Kane should ban that because that's probably not in Jensen's pool, because if you remember, Jensen had said he has wrist issues and he's not playing a lot of solo queue or a lot of scrim. So that means he actually doesn't have a lot of time to practice a new champion like Quiyana. So I don't think that's within his champion pool even now. So that seems like either a pocket pick that Cloud9 can take advantage of, or it's something to where TL are just going to have to bite the bullet and actually ban that champion and kind of waste a ban. So both of these teams kind of have a ban that they probably should do in the sense of Sona and Quiyana, but then again, there are just a lot of really good players between these two teams, and I think it's actually going to be a pretty close match. But like I said, I just think bot lane, it's a free one game at least, and then also I think Reaper botching a draft is also probably a free win too, and it's going to make things harder for Cloud9. So predicting 3-2, and I think this is going to be a pretty good series because, of course, Cloud9, their style is more aggressive early game and kind of randomness in terms of taking aggressive skirmishes a lot of the times, snowballing from mid jungle, which is different from TL's either trying to snowball bot, letting top get its own pressure and then playing off of that later on in the game, or letting mid get their own pressure, playing off of that later on in the game too. So I think overall, both of these teams have very different styles, and it's going to be really cool to see if either of these teams can actually play against a style which is really good at probably the upper levels of what a team can actually accomplish with that style, And with that said, I think whether either team wins, it's going to show that at Worlds, they actually stand a really good chance of going far because they know that they can play against this other particular style, which is way different from theirs, and actually beat it. And I think that's a really valuable thing, if anything, that we can draw from this best of 5 final. But I'm going to give this shit to TL, yo.